Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. We're excited for today's presentation on preparing for complex physical security improvements. Mark Schreiber of Safeguards Consulting has some great content planned, and we also have reserved time at the end of the broadcast for questions and answers. But before we get into the broadcast, let's quickly cover some logistics. If you get disconnected, please rejoin using the same link that you used to originally log in. Your microphones are all muted, but you can submit questions at any time using the Q&A button. And we really want to facilitate candid questions and feedback on this broadcast. And so we will not attribute any questions you might ask or any comments you might make to you as an individual. My name is Andrew Saluk, and I'm your moderator for today's discussion. This webinar is presented by Topo AI. We provide a cloud-first threat intelligence platform that helps security teams across all industries respond faster to risk and threat events. And we do this by mapping intelligence and asset information from many sources into one platform. We also include the industry's most advanced workflows so that you can rapidly address the threats that might impact your organization. We call our product Topo One. And now, allow me to introduce our presenter, Mark Schreiber. Mark is the president and principal consultant for Safeguards Consulting, a security design and consulting firm based in Greenville, South Carolina. Mark has more than 20 years experience in security engineering, and he's also a certified protection professional through ASIS International. And thank you for being here, Mark.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's my pleasure to be here and speak to the group. I hope everyone is having a great Friday and staying safe during these time frames. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share this knowledge. I'm going to cover a lot of content in the time frame that we have, so it's going to be kind of an inch deep, mile wide. But by all means, feel free to reach out to Andrew, myself, with any questions after the event or during the event in the Q&A as your time permits.
Mark, thank you. I'm so sorry to interrupt there. Before you get too far into the presentation, I did want to see kind of where the audience stands with their own security projects they might be planning. Would that be all right if we ask them that question now?
By all means.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that, Mark. And so we're trying to understand where the audience stands for any projects they might be planning in the future. And so if you could please take a moment just to answer the polling question you see on your screen right now. Are you planning any physical security improvements over the next 12 months? And please select all that apply. You could select A, if you're installing new systems or technology, B, if you're replacing or upgrading existing systems or technology, C, if you're establishing or improving your existing GSOC, D, if you're incorporating threat intelligence or perhaps some other type of risk data, or select option E if you don't have any physical security improvements planned within the next 12 months. And we'll give everyone just a few more seconds to answer, and then we can we'll show how everyone answered, or not how everyone answered. We'll show the statistics, and then we'll get into Mark's presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. That'd be very helpful.
You bet. All right, we're going to end the poll there, and we'll just go ahead and share the results. So hopefully everyone can see there. About half of you indicated that you're installing new systems or technology. The majority of you indicated that you're replacing or upgrading existing systems or technology. About a third are establishing or improving a GSOC. Roughly 30% are incorporating threat intelligence or other risk data. And then about 22% of the audience has no physical security improvements within the next 12 months. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
No, thank you, Andrew. That's very, very informative. So for those who do have plans in place, hopefully I'm able to provide some information that you can take advantage of in the process, maybe be able to implement as well as early as today. For those who don't have improvements planned, this is really good information for you when the next project or need comes up. So you can essentially address the whole process in its entirety versus catching it, part of the way through. And so that's where I'm going to go through this program is from an end-to-end approach, and ideally and optimally being able to take advantage of the most useful information and parts of the process as we go through this. So again, today we're going to specifically talk about preparing for complex physical security improvements. So within that context, we're looking at projects that are not the, simple 1 month, 2 month, 3 month kind of effort, or dealing with just a specific security system improvement. We're talking about when we get into the level of complexity, very large projects, whole building campus types of construction projects and improvements or renovations, or multi-site renovations, where the complexity really just gets us to a totally different scale. As Andrew was so kind to introduce me, and how I know Andrew is through ASIS International, where I am a volunteer community vice president, as well as supporting on the regional level. And I led the ISO CPTED standard, ISO 22341, which was recently produced on my personal role. But I support my company, Safeguards Consulting, which is an engineering and technical consulting firm helping individual organizations plan for their improvements, which is where this information and experience comes from. I teach regularly for ASIS International and for other organizations and industry efforts in sharing the experience and knowledge from the unique perspective of developing very, very large projects across the globe with multiple integrated physical security systems, complex systems, and also integrated to the complete design process, working with architects and engineers. So when we talk about security improvements, when we're planning for those, it's very important to understand the macro picture and then dive into the micro and avoid from getting caught into the weeds when it's unnecessary. So we always want to define the start of the process. The start of the process itself is understanding what is required, what fits the business model, and how that can be implemented. So most organizations typically have some type of compliance requirement, liability requirement that they're having to address. And that's just kind of the cost of doing business, the cost of supporting security within their environment. And it's fundamental, and everyone has these requirements for their specific organization, their industry, different service functionality. And that's going to be a standard, but we're going to talk about going above and beyond those. So whether you have federal, state, jurisdictional requirements, whether you are involved with government regulations and have to follow like DHS or DOD types requirements and such, those are your minimum standards. That's where you have to start and then go above and beyond. But everybody also has liability concerns. So your awareness and tie into your legal team, your legal department is very important. So you understand how you can support standard of care, premise liability, legal issues, legal precedents, and foreseeability in protecting your organization. And those, again, are at the minimum level, how we may need to make sure we address those in any type of security improvement that we put forth. And that's how we fit in with our regular operations. So when, as you see in that little green diagram here, our regular operations in themselves are a process that keeps continuing. But if we just stay with an operations-only focused mindset, we will stagnate, fall behind, start to introduce risk and liability that's not appropriate for us and for our organization. So we really have to expand our approach to greater than operational focus and really look at implementing things such as continual improvement, where even though we're supporting our operations, we're always looking at how we can get better, how we can continually improve. And that's when we bring in an analysis piece, a planning piece, design piece, and implementation piece that feeds right back into our standard security operations. And we just keep circling through that process, whether that's done on a quarterly basis, annual basis, every 2 years. That's appropriate for the organization and its staff and resources, but everyone should have this kind of continual improvement mindset where they can start to implement that. And you go through an analysis and planning by supporting the assessments, getting resources, whether it's internal or external, to help do that inward look above and beyond your operations, and then going to the external resources for the design and implementation phase, which we'll talk about. Now, the most common industry standard for how we support this continual improvement within physical security and security operations overall is through risk assessments. Risk assessment is a term that shouldn't scare anybody. It's a term effectively that every mature security organization should be implementing, but how it's handled and how it's done varies greatly. It's almost each organization kind of handles it slightly different than each other, but there is a standardized process and multiple distinct methodologies that you can implement to support risk assessments. But at this macro level, what we're going to identify is that the risk identification process allows you to define which threats, which vulnerabilities, which assets all have the highest priority for your security risk mitigation, and you allow you to provide the available resources to those highest priority risks, and then deal with the other risks as appropriate, whether it's through transfer with insurance or other means, in order to handle what is the biggest risk to your organization. And as you mature and you go through risk assessment process methodology over time, you will start to knock off the higher risks and be able to start dealing with the medium risks and then eventually the lower risk items in a very strategic and professional approach. But again, risk assessments are there to provide that holistic view and all hazards view of all of your security organization team's requirements. And this should be tied directly into your enterprise risk approach, whether you deal with ERM, enterprise risk management, and you tie in security risk to that, or specifically enterprise security risk management, where we're supporting all departments within our organization and providing it to the complete risk approach, or just unique to security risks and addressing that. The appropriate identification is, as much as you can identify risks and treat those risks as appropriate, is the more likely you're going to be able to mature your security organization. Once we have a good understanding of how we are assessing our risks and prioritizing our risks, then we can start to apply our standard security principles. And these are universal, and these have been around with us for decades for the most part, but it's understanding how to handle that in a formal methodology. So we have the 5 Ds or 6 Ds of deter, deny, detect, delay, and defend, or military version destroy, and how we can address those different methodologies and give us the various operations for security measures, options for security measures, I should say. We then apply defense in depth, where we're trying to provide a layered security approach, where we have different multiple
Just one moment, everyone. It appears Mark is getting his audio reconnected. Hang tight just one moment, everyone. And Mark, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you're having difficulty with the audio through the computer, you could also use the dial-in. I can help you with that.
Andrew, do I have you back?
Yes, loud and clear.
I apologize. The technology changes here and troubles for some reason was disconnected there from the Zoom line. I apologize to all of those in attendance. So as I was speaking, I believe when I was disconnected there, I was talking about defense in depth and layered security. And the process there is how we're trying to layer multiple security measures so that we can support not just one single dependent solution. We're trying to have multiple solutions, which gives us the ability to a level of redundancy, as well as a level of complexity as we're trying to address these security concerns. The next focus is actually relatively new, and it comes from our cybersecurity colleagues, but that's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I won't delve into that specifically, but it's very important to understand that we're not only managing physical assets, we're not only managing people, we're also managing critical data. and how we can support that data and accessibility to the organization is very important. So understanding how we can secure that through confidentiality, making sure that the data itself is the true data and authentic data we're looking for and available for business function is now a core fundamental for security operations. And last but not least is continuous security, which means we treat items as in a continued, a consistent basis as much as possible, because our adversaries, our threats, are going to look for the weakest link. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting our assets in an equal manner across the organization as appropriate for their risk. So once we have this good understanding of how we're going to define and treat our very specific high risks, it's important to understand to communicate what should the improvement be. And the industry standard for how we communicate that is through what's called functional requirements, specifically physical security functional requirements, which address how we're going to specifically improve our organization in a functional methodology to provide a level of improvement. And what functional requirements are is they're defining the risk to a specific improvement. They're going to describe very specifically the function of those security measures to protect that risk, hence the name, functional requirements. Requirements themselves should be simple and concise. They should not get into the weeds. They should not be complex at all. They should be defined as a simple manner, therefore that they're as portable and universal across your organization as possible. They're not specific, should not be specific to technologies or specific brands, because you may define a functional requirement today and the technology industry environment could change drastically over the next 6 months, 2 years before you actually get a chance to implement them. And therefore you don't want it to be tied to a technology or brand that may have changed drastically within that time frame. You still want to meet that core function. And then these requirements independently become part of your security program as your design basis or components of your design basis in defining the functional requirements. Last but not least, as I touched on, these functional requirements should be universal to your organization, regardless of what campus, what facility, what site, what country you're applying these to. You want them to be universal to your organization. That gives you not only a level of a definition of standard, but it also gives you a level of being consistent across your organization. So you are treating risk equally across your organization. Some examples of functional requirements are listed here. I won't read through them, but you can see how these examples come across your whole organization in various different solutions. Some of them are personnel focused. Some of them are dealing with your physical environment. Some are very technology focused. And that's okay. There's not a limitation to that. It's defining where these apply. And you can see how you bring these into your security program. You can apply these pretty easily across most of your facilities. For example, the very last one, provide common operating picture software to view employee travel activity and weather information. This could be applied directly to the Topo 1 solution, or others, and it allows you to very clearly define what you're trying to address and improve within your organization. So once we have those functional requirements defined, our risks and risk mitigation plans defined, then we actually go into a project, right? Everything we've been leading up to before is how we prepare for this project. Now we've gotten to the point where we have a clear understanding of what we're trying to achieve, what is the definition of success, and we're actually going to kick off a full security improvement project. And this is much more formalized, but it does require a great deal of resources, external as well as internal, to support that. And within the physical security realm, here are kind of the key players simplified in this role. First off, there is the owner. That is the actual person who's going to be funding and control of the project, defining the risk requirement for that and the functional requirements supported with that. Is the projects are appropriate and large enough or complex enough, they typically will hire a technical security consultant who will come in and help them clearly define what those expectations are and the requirements are for those functional requirements and physical security improvements overall, who teams with the architects, engineers, across the whole design team to make sure that the overall facility is supported. Now, sometimes a project is driven purely by construction, and so in that case, you have the general contractor, the architect, engineer there to build out the facility, and then they may hire the technical security consultant or work with the technical security consultant that is hired by the owner, but ultimately it all works within the same team to support that improvement. And then you have the security integrator or security installation contractor, if that's a preferred term, that is the actual procurement and installation of the products to make them move into place. And they're the ones who let the contract and get to the specific installation requirements for that, which are driven by the owner, by the technical security consultant, as well as the architect engineers to make it fit within the overall project improvement. And last but not least is the owner again. And this might seem like it's an error, but it's actually intentional, because once the project is complete, it goes back into the hands of the owner, but the owner is, in that case, typically the operator, security department, IT facilities, whatever is appropriate for your organization. And that may not be the person who initially was there at the beginning of the project to define what is, the requirements and the overall measures of success. So it's key that both ends of that owner department, operator and the authority or buyer, are there aligned to make sure that ultimately what is provided is optimal and useful for the security operations team. So we always typically ask that both of those entities at the owner's organization are at the table, are in the meetings, are engaged and updated on how the project moves forward. That way it can always stay on track and moving to success. The project team itself is much greater than that. As you can see, here's a list of the many different architects, engineering trades, owner representatives who would be engaged within that. But very specifically for security, it comes down to the security management and then the internal security team members, the security consultant, security engineer, externally that was hired, tied in with your facility, IT,
Sounds like we might have some audio difficulties again, folks. Just hang tight for just a moment. Mark is dialing back in right now. And you are muted, Mark. Sounds like you're back.
Andrew, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I've switched to my computer audio. Folks, I apologize for that. This is actually a first time I've dealt with a Zoom telephone issue. So usually that's helpful. So I'll continue with that. I apologize again for the delay on that one, and I hope the audio is good. Andrew, am I loud enough for the team? Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Again, apologies for the technical issues. So as I was speaking of, the actual team for a project itself is multiple individuals, multiple trades, multiple companies working together to support that. And within security design, it's important to understand there's multiple teams working together to make the security improvement happen. And it's also key to understand these are all tied in with all the engineering done for the organization, whether it's a large renovation or a brand new construction project. You can have multiple engineers listed there under multidisciplinary engineers, as well as specialty consultants, such as if you have blast concerns, chemical, biological, radiation concerns, CBRE, hazardous materials, and things such as AV can all be part of the team depending on the size of the project itself. And once we've defined what are the requirements for the facility itself and specifically security, those are communicated in security deliverables, the design deliverables themselves. The most common you will see are floor plans, network diagrams, installation details, and equipment wiring diagrams, all tie together with a document that's called the specifications or specs. That addresses everything required for the overall facility, if you're building new or renovating. And within that, physical security is tied under Division 28. Of the multiple divisions, you go all the way down to 28, and that's when you'll see the physical security specifications. And that's where, in a word-based format, you're communicating everything that can't be communicated with pictures, how things should be installed, specific methodologies for the equipment procurement, installation, vetting, and et cetera, that goes above and beyond those drawings or documents. In a modern environment, we're actually typically using a BIM model, building information modeling, such as AutoCAD, Revit, where we're actually providing a 3D modeling environment that shows all that information. Same application applies. Instead of two-dimensional drawings, we're using a three-dimensional model that you can move through, walk through, and see different advantage points tied together with a Division 28 specification document. And all of these are supported specifically to meet our needs and requirements to support physical security design. So we start with requirements and criteria, such as unified facilities criteria for within the government space. VA has their own requirements. Nuclear, which is part of my background, the NRC has their very specific requirements. We have all those that start to drive the design fundamentally. But then we actually look at how we can address those risks very specifically with design methodologies. So when we partner with the architects and other engineers in the actual design of the building, the structures themselves, we actually use some advanced design capabilities such as CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, where we actually help dictate the entrances, the windows, how the building is laid out, the throughway, exits, the capability of access to parking and public spaces. All of those can be supported with CPTED in actually modifying the environment that one works in or lives in to enhance and support protection, but also to mitigate crime and make it feel ideally very uncomfortable for a criminal or a threat to try and accomplish any type of crime in that environment. We also worked very specifically with the other engineers in supporting building systems that support security, such as security lighting. Security lighting itself is an extensive effort and can have a significant impact to how an organization is utilized and perceived from the public. And so making sure that we're providing good lighting and very specific security lighting measures at the industry, at the facility is very important. We also look at building hardening. And this can be sometimes confused with other applications, but building hardening is how we can actually look at the structure of the building itself to make it more resistant to different types of threats and attacks, right? Looking at whether we're protecting through the windows, protecting the walls, looking at blast resistance, force resistance, dealing with types of CBRNE type of attacks, which has now become another concern, not because of intentional attacks, but because of the pandemic and those types of infectious diseases, but also looking at infrastructure and whether the systems themselves are capable of supporting an event, an incident, an attack, and being redundant and resilient. All of those fit within the actual hardening of the systems and hardening of the structures themselves. And that requires physical security consultants, engineers like ourselves, to work with all those other engineers and the architects to make sure that the building itself is inherently resistant. And obviously with the pandemic, as we've all been living through, right, we have new threats or expanding threats addressing those. So how we're addressing the facility protection against infectious disease is now a new factor that's been exacerbated. We provided a document and guidance on this. Now it's a year old. It's amazing how time has flown. And we termed it infectious disease hardening. You're welcome to download that and learn about that, but it's essentially how we can implement and support screening, temperature screening, physical screening, attestation, physical distancing, all the measures that are recommended by the different healthcare authorities, but using the physical security of the building and physical security systems appropriately. we see this kind of same circle of the same principles revisited again. In this case, it's using the same types of protections we would use in a laboratory, a healthcare type of environment, but now expanded to the greater buildings overall. But the fundamentals have stayed the same. We just keep adapting new technologies and new finer details and requirements to support those efforts. And then of course we have the actual physical security technologies, which everybody thinks of when they talk about physical security design, but it's important to understand this is just one of the components required overall. And that's where we take advantage of all the technologies that are available to us to implement them accordingly. This is a rather complex environment, and for the time frame of this, I won't go into the systems detailed and specific, but here's kind of our overview that we like to share when we're teaching people about physical security. Essentially, physical security systems are a system of systems, multiple components all tied together ideally and working together to support that. The big four, the kind of ones we see at almost every location, is video surveillance, access control, intrusion detection, and communication systems. But as time has moved on, we've started to realize there's even more and more technologies and applications that can be applied. So no longer is it just fixed. We're actually looking at these technologies in a mobile environment, whether it's on a human, in a vehicle, on a robot, flying through the air in a drone. The technologies still have their applications appropriately. And we're all tying into protecting assets, so asset management systems are another key component that fall within physical security in our modern day and age. But as we try and put all these systems together, we tie them through integrations and even specific software, such as PSIM, physical security information modeling, or security management systems is the older term, or security unification, where we're tying these systems in more inherently at the core, or dealing with specialty, GSOC and common operating picture solutions, such as Topo 1, to give us an understanding of the greater environment and situational awareness to tie in these systems together so we can appropriately respond and address any types of incidents, alarms, etc. And we tie these into the organization through business databases, cybersecurity databases, business intelligence systems, so we can actually provide useful intelligence to our partners in the organization, as well as gathering information from other departments that feed into the security ecosystem. What above and beyond that is how we manage this within security operations and GSOCs to make sure that we're seeing all these environments across our whole environment, whether it's across a nation, a region, or a globe, in order to make sure that we're communicating the major threats, the major risks that need to be addressed, and giving the support and scalability for our response capabilities and teams to the organization. And then as we advance in technologies, we're taking new innovations in play, such as specifically robotics or unmanned ground vehicles, UGVs, and allowing them to support and provide a force multiplier to our team so they can go out and do the more menial patrols, the menial monitoring, simple information, as well as some overt presence capability, and bringing that information back to our ecosystem so we can utilize our humans, our security officers to the maximum level, as well as drones and robotic, drones is part of the robotics piece. UAS is the technical term for that, which my company has done some extensive efforts in counter UAS systems, as well as UAS, and in bringing in this technology. So now the mobile capabilities are exponential. We're now talking about things moving on the ground, moving through the air that can provide that data gathering intelligence, that situational awareness information to us, as well as even some response capabilities. So we're able to make the most critical, useful, beneficial information, assessments, and response, so we can provide that response that's effective and optimal without actually having to risk humans as we used to have to in the past. So these advanced technologies allow us to tie this all together and implement them within the design itself. Again, all of these are tied back into our risks, our functional requirements for what our security improvement is going to do and what it's going to achieve and how it's going to mitigate those risks, and then going through the process to define specifically what solutions, what improvements, what technologies, what means those security measures can be addressed and implemented, and ultimately what defines success. So when that project is complete and it's handed back over to the end user, the owner, it's going to work exactly as envisioned, or close to envisioned, so they can say, yes, this will allow us to implement on day one and move forward and continue to advance as an organization. I know that was a great deal of information I covered there in a rather short time. And again, apologies for the technical difficulties, but we do have a few minutes for questions. So I'll hand it back over to Andrew, so Andrew can give information about how to ask questions and answer which ones we have with the time remaining. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Andrew, I believe you're muted.
I think, can you hear me all right, Mark? Oh, my microphone looks like it's active. I don't know if you can hear me or not, but I'm going to go ahead and ask the question here. Yes, they can hear me. The audience can hear me, Mark. Maybe you cannot. So Mark is going to dial back into his phone. Everyone, thanks for sending in your questions so far. We've received some before the broadcast, and they're coming in right now. So I think maybe Mark, are you able to hear me now? It doesn't. Well, folks, I'm going to give this my best shot here. So one question that we got was, if somebody is a non-security professional, how can they polish their technical skills in connection with one of these projects? And this audience member noted that many of the organizations want a single consultant to carry out all the tasks, including assessments, concepts, design, integration, and commission. So folks, I'm going to send Mark this question over chat, and we'll see if he can answer that.
Andrew, I apologize. My audio was also not working there. I missed the question.
Oh, so sorry. You can hear me again now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay, yeah, so let's say that somebody is a non-technical security professional. So how can they gain or polish their technical skills while working on a physical security project? And this audience member noted, most organizations want a single consultant to carry out all tasks, including assessments, concepts, design, integration.
Excellent. That's a really good question, and a pretty extensive answer I can provide, but for the sake of time, it's a I'll use the term again, continual improvement. It's a continual career advancement and opportunity. There's many different things that you can learn to understand how to support the improvements, how to support the different technologies and applications. And there is no perfect methodology to follow to learn. I typically say follow your passions, and start with what you have an interest in, and then take advantage of any education within that role appropriately. As I mentioned before, Andrew and I know each other through ASIS International, which has a great deal of educational resources, but there's others out there, other organizations, conferences, online trainings. Go follow your passion or what's appropriate for the task at hand to learn through that. If you are doing a career change and now you're going to be 100% security professional, security department, we typically recommend, my organization typically recommends starting with the physical security professional certification, PSP, and you start going down that path and you learn about the technologies, and then you earn that certification once you've reached that. And then when you get into management, there's the CPP, but that's just one of multiple solutions that you can follow along that way. There's many books out there as well if you're more of a book person. I kind of like, Nike says, just do it. Just follow your passion and start learning. And as you start going down the path of learning, you'll find other options and other ways where you can take advantage of education.
That's a great answer, Mark. Thank you. And another audience question here. So one question I've gotten a couple of times is, are we going to share the presentation? Yes, we absolutely will. We'll send it out early next week, link to the recording, also Mark's materials, so you have them for reference. And then another question from the audience here. Are there benchmarking standards or statistics that can show the value of a GSOC or operations around creating a SOC? Is an approach being made to create one that will need functioning support if there is information that can be shared? So I think basically this audience member is asking is, one, are there benchmarking standards that you can help sell a GSOC project to your C-suite? And then, or any information you can provide to help them sell it to the C-suite or determine if it's effective.
Right. No, another great question. And unfortunately, short answer is no, because most organizations don't build their GSOC to match others. They build it to be unique and custom to their environment. So no two essentially are going to be the same. You know, I'll say, for example, like Microsoft, which has had one of the leading GSOCs that they've been able to share, you know, the operations publicly. They've changed their GSOC methodology greatly over the past few years. And so anyone who even tried to emulate what they had, which was rather difficult in its size and scale, has had to pivot accordingly if that was the model they faced. So essentially, I say reach out to your peers, learn about other GSOCs, and then if you find one that mimics what your goals are, then ask if they're willing to share how that was constructed, you know, and how that was aligned. Ultimately, it all needs to feed back to what are your highest priority risks and what's appropriate for the methodology and operations for your organization. Because if you can follow those, it will allow you to build and grow your GSOC in kind with your organization and not necessarily be disconnected with your overall business case.
Hey, Mark, thank you for that answer. And just, I can add a couple comments from my own experience there. So one thing that a lot of our customers are looking at is how much work their operators or analysts have to do and how long it takes them to respond. Now, this requires them having a GSOC to begin with, but they're showing that they're making effective use of those resources. And then in connection with that, I'm thinking of a pharmaceutical company that's one of our customers. They're really concerned about travelers to risky locations. They're concerned about supply chain security, and they're concerned about these high value loads that they have going out all over the world. So their approach is very much focused on showing their executive team, hey, we're protecting revenue. Here's how much, here's where, and we're also protecting our people. Here's how many people, and here's where they're going. So thank you for that question from the audience there. So another question we had here, Mark. So if there's a new or young company that's maybe maybe it's a young company, maybe young security team too, do you have any recommendations on which types of technology or projects they should first examine or implement?
Right, that's another great question. And I'm going to overly simplify this, but I've seen this so many times over and over with an organization. Fundamental to every security operations team is communications. It's boring, can sometimes be seen simplistic, but if you cannot communicate across your team and across your organization, you will not be able to properly respond to an incident and, you know, in the worst case, a significant disaster. So if you do not have your communications down, a very clear communications and emergency operations plan, you're going to be spending money on things that may not really matter during a significant event. Now, access control, video surveillance, very functional and beneficial, but if you can't communicate during an actual incident and an event, right, then you're not going to be able to take advantage of the capabilities of your personnel and your team. So I always say, start with having a very clear and functional communication systems, and then build on to security operations above that. Now, ideally, most organizations can start off with more than just communications and other technologies, but I see pretty frequently where good, solid, and reliable communications tend to be an issue that keeps lingering with the organization, even though they're spending money on other technologies.
Thank you, Mark. That's a really good point. One of the things I'll share anecdotally, a lot of security programs seem to get either a start or a significant boost after something bad happens. And so to Mark's point, it's like being able to mitigate that by communicating as quickly as possible seems to be really important. And then you do your after action review and determine how could we prevent this from happening to begin with. So thank you for that answer, Mark. Another question that came in, so there's a couple different versions of this question, but one version of it was, what is your view on the difference between fully integrated technology versus standalone systems? And then another audience member asked, hey, when does leveraging a single product for all your functions go too far? So I'll kind of pose those together to you, Mark.
So there is always a balance, and again, very simplified answer here for a complex situation, but there's always a balance for looking at technologies that really can hit the bottom line and provide, not only a value, but ideally a return on the investment, to the relationship that you have with any external parties who are providing those technologies and, most importantly, supporting those technologies. And it requires both of those to be capable for you to actually, avoid unnecessary grief, effort, friction in your organization. So we always start with leading in a best of breed type of discussion to meet what are the goals for the improvement, and then specifically those risks. And then we back off of those best of breeds to talk specifically about what is the capability of support and long-term improvement with those technologies to meet the organization. So for an example, we may have an organization who is geographically limited to a very select number of security integrators that can support them. We would never recommend a product that can't be supported by the geographical support service team. We want to make sure that we fit within that environment and give them more than one option, ideally, because companies change, environments change, et cetera. So we want to have some level of redundancy in support. So we always look for what is capable for the system, but tie it in with the service capability for the organization, and ultimately meet their goals. The reality is most organizations don't use more than, we'll say, 60 to 70% of the capabilities of their system. So the best of breed is not necessarily always required, but it gives them the options to move forward that. But the capabilities support those systems will always be a limiting factor. So you want to make sure that that is enabled within your decision choices regarding technology.
Thank you, Mark. I know we're just over time. I'm wondering if you might be able to answer one more question for the audience.
Sure thing.
And thank you for your time there, Mark. So do you have any sources? So we talked about some different functional requirements earlier. Do you have any sources for either functional requirement templates or other materials that somebody might use, maybe if they don't have as much of a technical background, to help start building the case for these improvements, or at least move it along?
Right. So I know ASIS International does a facility security design course that they do go through functional requirements, and they give a number of examples. But it's not a requirement. You can come up with functional requirements on your own. And then once you get with your security consultant, engineer, and start talking through those, then those can be refined, at that point. In fact, in other words, don't let it limit you. Use it as a starting point to make sure that you're addressing all of the risks that you intend to address with the security improvement, and then use it as a communication tool. Once you have the feedback with the consultant, then those will be refined, and then that can be what you use moving forward for other departments, other locations, universally in your security program. Great question.
And thank you for your answer, Mark. And so that brings us to the end of the broadcast. I'd like to thank Mark Schreiber and Safeguards Consulting for the presentation today. And I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for joining us and for your thoughtful questions. Mark and I wish you good luck with any upcoming security projects. We'll circulate these materials early next week. Please consider us a resource if you have questions or want to help define or describe your project a little bit better. And I'd also like to ask the audience to please take part in our exit survey. We use that information to help plan future broadcasts. And we hope you'll join us again for our next broadcast or one in the future. Thank you, everyone, and have a very nice day and weekend.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Be safe.